we try and do that as it pertains to narrative. Right? So what people are writing about and talking about and what they think about West Virginia, both in West Virginia and outside West Virginia. We also try and help people who are like civic guerrillas, right? Just doing cool stuff to try and help their community. We try and connect people who are trying to create creative placemaking opportunities, try and bring more people and vibrancy into their communities. And there's so much of it going on, and they don't always know each other. And they can't always learn from each other. And so that was the inspiration for the first news story was, oh, this guy, man, this is incredible. I wonder if these people in Princeton, they should meet each other. And there were so many of those things happening in the state that we thought we got to stuff them in a room. Like, let's just stuff them in a room and have a party to celebrate them, and they can learn from each other. So that's what News Story is. So the opportunity and the challenge with News Story is that the attraction of News Story is not the food, and it ain't the handouts, because there aren't any. It's you guys, right? If it's this. These people start conversations and raise ideas, and you guys have got to be a part of that mix, okay? So it's like a potluck. Bring something to the potluck. And that's how we generate our energy, and that's how we generate good ideas, and that's how we generate good projects, and that's our goal. So a few housekeeping, the Dunnies, outside past the lift, around the corner. Food, read the back of the sheet for information about food. There's food options in the building. If you have a question, if you want to know something, most of the hub staff are out in the entranceway there. And also there's some building staff here. Krista, just look for WVU staff and they can help you. They're very useful and very helpful. The Wi-Fi, use the guest login, and it'll follow you through the prompts on how to connect. Dana, anything else I'm missing in terms of housekeeping and things like that? Awesome. And on that note, WVU's, the Reed College of Media and the Media Innovation Center, we couldn't do this without them. It's an amazing venue. This shiny room is half the reason why, is the reason we have it here is to encourage creative thinking, right? And futuristic thinking and open-mindedness. And this is just the most beautiful building to do that. So thank you to the Dean, to Dana, and to all the staff for letting us do here. It's a ton of fun. Okay. Without further ado, this was kind of the origin of this year's news story in a lot of ways. I heard about a group of journalists around the state, some of them from the Charleston Gazette-Mail, but some of them from other organizations in the state that wanted to explore what was happening in terms of media innovation, right? Like what do digital newsrooms look like? What are the newsrooms that are 5 years ahead of the game? What are they doing that's different? And it was admirable they were doing that. They wanted to improve the functioning of their newsroom. They wanted to produce better content. They wanted to work better with audiences. And so I thought, man, first we need to pat them on the back. And secondly, we need to tell a ton of other people in West Virginia what this looks like. So I'm going to let these people introduce themselves. We have here Geoff Hing, Glenn Flanagan, and Maria Young. Maria, I'm going to start by asking you, what is the ONA? Talk us through it.
So the ONA is the Online News Association. It's a national organization. If you go to major metropolitan areas like New York City and LA and Washington, D.C., and really cool hip happening places like that, you'll find ONA organizations in almost every single one of those cities and a number of places internationally as well. In cities like Charleston and Huntington and Morgantown and cities the size that a lot of cities are in West Virginia, they're not as prevalent and prominent. The national organization is, I think, fairly well known for bringing folks together who are trying to do really cool, interesting, tech-savvy projects. They bring together journalists, innovators, people who have a nonprofit organization or who have a business and they're trying to tell their story online in a way that is connecting to their audience, and they want to do that in a better way. And they take these folks and put them all together. And I'm going to let Glenn describe a little bit more about it, but I'll tell you the way it started for me is that I was a member of ONA in Washington, D.C. when I worked there a few years ago. And fast forward a few years, and I'm working at the Charleston Gazette-Mail, and I'm trying to do this really exciting, innovative, and interesting data project, and I hit a snag, and I'm sort of banging my head against a wall trying to remember stuff from grad school and wishing I'd paid more attention. And, I'm Googling online trying to troubleshoot. I've got this one stupid little problem that I can't figure out, and it's probably something like, line 97, row F, there's a decimal point in the wrong place, or something like that. And it's one of those things that if you know this stuff, you can see it and you can figure it out. But if you don't know it really well, it can drive you crazy and it can absorb like the better part of a month in your life. And that's where I was. And I just thought, there have to be people in Charleston or Huntington or Morgantown or in the state of West Virginia who know this stuff really well. And if I knew them, I could call them up and I could say, hey, can you help me out with this? And it would take them 5 minutes. But I don't know those folks, and that's kind of what the O&A is all about.
What did that outreach look like? What was the very first thing you did when you realized you had that problem and you wanted to solve it?
Oh, I was Googling. I was looking at tutorials online, and I was going to folks in the newsroom who've done similar projects and going, hey, can you help me out? And they're like, I'd love to. I'm on deadline, maybe tomorrow. And, and to call somebody up blind that you don't know, you could call, the folks at the journalism school in Huntington or here in Morgantown, but to introduce yourself and say, listen, I know you don't know me. We've never met, and I'm sure you've got really important things that you're doing in your own life, but could you help me with this problem? It's just not going to work. And so what you really need is a connection to somebody that that you can reach out to, and that's what the O&A does, is it facilitates that kind of association and that kind of networking. So that if you are a journalist, if you are an innovator, if you're somebody who understands tech-savvy stuff, and you're like, wow, I'd love to be able to find a use for these skills. If you're a nonprofit organization or you're a business and you want to tell your story better online in a way that's more engaging for your audience, a lot of times you don't know how to do that. It's hard to find those folks with those skills unless you have an organization like this. And so, for me, I just turned to some folks in the newsroom and I said, why don't we start this thing? And we reached out to other newsrooms in Charleston, and we reached out to the School of Journalism at Marshall and to the folks here at the Media Innovation Center. And everybody was really excited about it. We've had a couple of sessions in Charleston. We've had a session here in Morgantown. We've got something coming up in Huntington later on this year through Marshall University. But what we really need for an organization like this to thrive is for folks like you guys who think this is interesting and who have projects that you need some help with, or you have skills that you're willing to share, to come together and go, hey, here's what would be really helpful to me. Here's what, for my nonprofit, and I'm trying to tell my story for my business, here's what I need to know how to do. And so tell us what would be helpful and have a voice and get involved.
How hard was it to get the different newspaper or media companies to work together? Like, are the other papers taking a call from the Gazette Mail saying, what do you guys want? We're competitors? How interactive?
I think, and Glenn, you can answer that. You've reached out to a lot of those folks as well. From my perspective, I think everybody sort of understands, you're not going to tell deep, dark trade secrets, and nobody's going to go, well, I'm working on this exclusive that's going to come out next week, but don't do it because, nobody's going to do that. But...
Yeah, I think Maria kind of summed that up nicely. Can you hear me okay now? There we go. You do have some folks who maybe their corporate leaders are saying, well, here's the limitations on how much you can participate. But on a personal level, everyone has been, very willing to share, very willing to help. And a lot of times, what folks will do is take things that they've already worked through, and they'll say, "Hey, here are some things that we ran into working through it." For example, we had a presenter from WOWK-TV who was willing to share a lot about Facebook Instant Articles and Facebook Live. And so even though she couldn't get into, here's our upcoming strategy, of course, she could say, here are some things that we ran into getting this to work with our CMS, or here are some things that we ran into getting ads set up on Instant Articles. So there's that's part of what we're trying to do, is get folks out of their bubbles and realize that there's a lot in common. TV, public media, the newspaper, we're all trying to do a lot of these same things online, and there's a lot that we can share.
I think that's a great message for everyone here, is if you feeling a sense of isolation as a media producer, whether you work for an organization or you don't, or you're a freelancer, don't be settled down by that sense of isolation. These guys are telling you that there's a really strong collaborative spirit at work at the moment amongst media agencies in the state. So grab it. Put your hand up, ask questions, because it seems like they'll be responded to. I should have done introductions. Lovely Maria Young is the features editor for the Charleston Gazette-Mail. Is that correct? Glenn, you're the digital editor, is that correct?
Digital content manager is what they put on the cards.
Terrific, great. And Geoff Hing, who you hear from a little bit in a minute. Geoff, what's your title and role?
I'm a freelance news applications developer.
Okay.
Recently, I was a news applications developer at the Chicago Tribune.
Okay.
And I've been here coming in and out of West Virginia as an innovator in residence at the university.
Awesome. So, yeah, great. Yeah, so everyone keep the mics close to you if you wouldn't mind. Great. So Geoff is basically an incredibly smart and experienced person who WVU have brought on to teach us some cool things. So that's terrific. I'd like to hear some nuts and bolts. The first meeting that you guys had in Charleston, is that correct? What different organizations were there? And concretely, what was it that you were trying to learn? Like, what were the presentations?
So for the first organization, for the first meeting that we had, we wanted to, we didn't want to pick one thing because that might appeal to one group or not another. So we had four different sessions. We had it at the Economic Development Center on Canal Boulevard in Charleston, which is a really super tech-savvy area as well. It's got, 30 or 40 different television monitors and green screens and television studios and a lot of really innovative things that are interesting to folks who are doing this kind of work. And we took four different, and help me remember because it's been a while, we had four different sessions. We wanted to do, we asked some of the folks in the newsroom what they would like. We reached out to other media organizations. I know that represented were West Virginia Public Broadcasting, the Gazette-Mail, Wheelunk out of Wheeling, West Virginia Living, Metro News, WOWK. I'm not sure if I'm missing some probably, but I think we had a pretty good cross-section of people from television, from internet, from radio, from print. West Virginia Press Association was well represented. We had some designers, graphic designers, and folks like that. We had some folks who have just really great tech-savvy skills and said, I'd love to work with some journalists who have projects, I've got all these skills and I want to put them to use. And so we had all those folks who came together, and Eric Meadows was one of those folks. And help me out of
How many people are we talking about? Like, give people just a feel for the crowd.
I think for that first session we had 38 people. We did serve breakfast, and we also offered mimosas because we figure the way to get journalists to come out on a Saturday morning is to offer free food and alcohol.
Booze.
Even though it was 10 o'clock in the morning, we thought, we can go with mimosas, and that's a good way to do it. But we also offered it, we offered this at no cost. It doesn't cost anything. It's not about driving membership in ONA so much as it is about driving participation in ONA. So you don't have to join. If you want to join the ONA national group, that's great. There are some benefits. You can access the conferences and things like that. You can access some training manuals online. But our focus and our focus and drive, I think, is really about driving participation for the ONA local group and finding out what you need. And help me out remember the four.
Yeah, we had four training sessions at that first meeting. We had one on Facebook Instant Articles. We had one looking at some data work that public media had done. We had one looking at an investigation that Eric Ayer at the Gazette-Mail had done. And then we had, I'm missing one of the four sessions. We had a representative from Pointer talk about analytics, kind of the best way to make sure you're succeeding online. Do I want to look at page views? Do I want to look at total engage time? What's the best way to make sure we're on the right track with what we're doing? And she mentioned a couple different news outlets she thought were doing quite well with that. I believe the Dallas Morning News was one of the ones she used as an example. So those were the 4 training sessions we did that first meeting. We did a little bit after that kind of a smaller happy hour get-together as well, and then we had 2 training sessions at that. We had Ken Ward of the Gazette-Mail talk about beat blogging, kind of how to make time for that, how to deal with commenters, facilitate comments while not letting it turn into a flame war. And then we had Roxy Todd speak about podcasting, how to encourage your listeners to contribute audio, how to kind of walk them through the technical process of recording something you can use, and then also share some success stories from her series, The Struggle to Stay. And those are the training sessions we've done so far. We've only been up and running for about a couple months, so if you guys have ideas for something you'd like to see in the future, that's kind of why we're here.
Yes, that's really important. Hi, Doug.
Hey, sorry about that.
So that's amazing. I don't know about you all, but I think it's incredible that there's a basically free resource in West Virginia of journalists willing to share their teachings and share their information, share their training. A question for you guys, is there anything like this in somewhere else in West Virginia or even in Appalachia? If there's freelancers here or newsroom people,
I'm Michelle Duez from the Greater Bridgeport Convention and Visitors Bureau. We have a website, connectbridgeport.com. It's an online news and information source that's widely viewed throughout our region, actually. We report on news beyond Bridgeport. The intent of our site is to focus on the positive things going on in Bridgeport. We focus a lot on alumni and current activities in the city. We do report the news. Unfortunately, the news isn't always positive. But when we can, we try to keep it on the positive end. We also run a Facebook page along with that. As you said, it's like having an infant. We have to constantly monitor it. We do delete profanity and other things, which I find is unlike a lot of websites from other media outlets. They just kind of let it go on and it gets a little crazy and insane. We monitor ours constantly. It's a labor of love because we only have 4 employees, but it's pretty unique.
Wow.
And I think, just from what I know about the scene here, there's a few sites like this around the state, and they seem like the perfect group of people to connect to these guys. That's what we're trying to do here, is connect the traditional newsroom leaders to the, DIY citizen-led newsrooms, right? If we can put them together, I think they really help each other.
Hi, John Dahlia, editor of the Preston County News and Journal, 2 newspapers in Preston County. The Fairmont News, which is a weekly in Marion County. But the company I work for is NCWV Media, which is a whole handful of weekly and daily papers. But our focus, obviously the print, but our focus is, a lot of it is the electronic side. And so our social pages are extraordinarily vibrant. Everything from the Facebook Live and the Twitter and all that stuff combined. But what we've discovered is the real secret sauce, I guess, is the hyper-local reporting. We call it community journalism. So, you mentioned Bridgeport Connect and other kind of entities. We're kind of like a regional way of, or almost statewide way of doing that, but in a focused, hyper-local way. And so, of course, you're covering everything, the meetings and all this stuff, too. But it's been very successful for us.
Thank you, John. So the invite is out there. So we want to, Geoff's going to do a session in a minute on data visualization and what newsrooms can do with data. And this is exactly the sort of learning and education we want to bring to all of y'all, right? So we want to actually see what that looks like. But one last question for Glenn. If in a year's time you look back and said, oh, it worked, this was good, what would that look like?
Well, if there were any projects where we helped bring people together, if we helped a journalist from any of these organizations come together with somebody who can help them either present their material visually or compile a data set they couldn't have done otherwise, I'd say that's a pretty good measure of success. If we've just got folks talking who otherwise wouldn't have made that connection, be that hooking someone from a newspaper up with someone from WVU or Marshall, I'd say that's a success. Really, we want to connect people, help them do their projects, and just give them kind of a network they wouldn't have had before.
Awesome. Thank you. So these people are... Yeah, sorry, Glenn.
And also just wanted to mention, if you guys have any questions, want to learn more about it, you can email westvirginia@journalists.org, or you can find ONAWV, that's our Facebook group. You can send a request to join that, and we update all of our events there. And of course, you can also track Maria and me down on the Gazette Mail's Contact Us page.
Awesome. Thank you, Glenn. So these people are here. Reach out to them. The door is wide open. So now we're going to hear from Geoff. Geoff, if you would mind just introducing yourself into the mic, just so people can be impressed by your resume like I was. And then, yeah, take it away.
Sure. So I'm Geoff Hing. I actually live in Chicago, so unfortunately a lot of these examples are going to be things from my experience there, but I think it's going to be applicable to the work you all are doing here in West Virginia. I, for the last few months, have been doing a fellowship here, mostly remotely, but also visiting and teaching through the Innovation Center. And so they asked me to come and talk about the focus of my research and work, which has been on small data. And I think that makes sense in the context of this panel, because I think of small data as sort of the local news, the local and regional news of big data. In many ways, we are the experts of our lives, just as local news organizations are the experts of their communities. And I want to focus on, in this talk today and in my work, on collecting and building data sets that may not be kept administratively or are very sparse. And to build data to tell this as the raw materials to tell the stories you're interested in your reporting and in your communities. So we've all probably heard about big data, right? And there's a lot of reporting from data sets that are very large, that are hundreds of thousands or millions of points of things. This is an example of one of those reports. It's from ProPublica and a story they did about racial disparities in the price of auto insurance. And that data set had about 400,000 rows, and there were actually 100,000 rows, and it's obviously taken from that's a small slice of a much larger domain of data, all the people who are buying car insurance. And this is an example of a chart from a report by the Upshot, who reverse engineered what's called the strategic subjects list in Chicago, which is a list the Chicago Police Department builds with an algorithm of people that they think have a risk of either being perpetrators or victims of street violence. And the Upshot did some pretty interesting statistical methods to try to see how much different factors like age, like being a victim of violent crime, increased the score of this algorithm even without the algorithm. But working with data of that size, even if it's a few 100,000 rows, let alone millions of rows, is perhaps beyond the capacity of many smaller newsrooms and organizations. But that doesn't mean that you can't or shouldn't work with data. And what I'm going to try to talk to you about today is how you can build data sets about very small things that are dozens or hundreds of rows and still tell really important stories. And that is a really good way, if you aren't doing a lot of data work, to begin doing it, because it will be working from data that you are absolutely expert at because you are the one who's collecting it. And also in many cases, as is the case with data about police-involved shootings or data about hate crimes, there are huge gaps in the officially collected data. So it's also an opportunity to apply the rigor of journalism or the experience of the work you're doing in your communities to collecting data that isn't being collected anywhere else, even by official entities.
Oh, thank you. That's gone.
So data can be very, very small. I don't know if any of you have seen this. This is a project called Dear Data, and it was two designers who every week sent each other a postcard visualizing data they collected from their lives. This is an example of a visualization of moments of indecision in their weekly life. So it's about, it's one person tracking this very small thing in 1 week, but they were still able to tell a story with it. Another example of a small data set at the Chicago Tribune, breaking news reporters built a database of shooting victims and homicides. Surprisingly, those were things that were not well tracked by the police department or tracked in the way that the public cared about. And so the reporters were out there covering these stories anyway. They put it into a database and were able to make visualizations like this, as well as tell the story in a number of other ways. Also, it can be a really great way to fact-check official sources and see if your numbers add up with theirs. This is a listing of farmers markets in the Chicago area. And you probably all are publishing lists of things like this, but this can be data. We have the name of the market, you have the address, the start date and the end date, some stipulations, the times. And when you break that out into a spreadsheet, it lets you turn it into an app. So people can answer more direct questions like, where is there a market today in a particular neighborhood? Instead of having to parse that through the long list. But journalistically, it also lets you answer other interesting questions like, are there more or fewer markets this year than there were last year? Are markets equally accessible throughout the city? If they're not, is that because of population or perhaps some other factor? Are you more or less likely to find a market in a suburban area that accepts food stamps? And those are stories that are harder to tell when you just have your information as a list that you're already publishing, but you can start asking those questions and answering some of them if you're keeping that same information as a data set. And this is just another small data set from a news organization that's kept in Chicago of what's happening to buildings that, school buildings when the schools have been closed, whether the buildings are sold, repurposed, or still for sale.
Hey, Geoff. As you're talking about, one of the opportunities that crops up that we have noticed in terms of a gap, in terms of like small community or city data, is abandoned buildings. It's a problem in, like, hands up if dilapidated buildings aren't a problem where you live. Yeah, where are you? Oh, good for you. You have a lovely neighborhood. There's kind of a gap in the local data. So if there are reporters out there that are looking for an excuse to try something like this, abandoned and dilapidated buildings would be amazing and very appreciated.
And I think that's a good example too of it, when you know that there are these things that where there is a gap in data and it's something that people care about, it can be an excellent opportunity to engage your audience in data collection. So instead of somebody, people writing a letter to the editor saying this is a big issue in the community, making a Google form where they can log an abandoned building, and from a combination of reporters doing it and your audience members adding, submitting that, you can fill in those gaps in the data. And it's also sort of collecting this passion about certain issues that your audience have, and maybe a way that's more productive and keeps them engaged in the story in a different way than them filling out an angry comment or writing to the editor. And I want to encourage the rest of you, if you have examples of doing data collection as audience engagement or building data sets in your newsroom, just like interrupt me. Or if any of you have examples of that, that would be great, or even ideas. And this is a national example. NBC News is just tracking the number of days that the president is spending at properties that he owns. So again, this is a very, very small data set. This is a few numbers of days, but it still tells an important story that people are concerned about. And it's something, again, that the news organization was reporting anyway, probably as daily stories, but they recognized that they could also track that as data. And this is not just work that journalists are doing. Community organizations can also build data sets to sort of tell the story of the work that they're doing. This is a shot from a database that was built by an organization called We Charge Genocide in Chicago that built this database as part of a report to the United Nations to talk about the way that policing was disproportionately harming communities of color in Chicago. And similarly, there are a lot of citizen science projects where organizations like these bucket brigades, I believe this one is in Louisiana, are using really inexpensive sensors or collection devices to collect data about pollution in their communities, which are adjacent to industrial facilities or large petrochemical facilities. So now I want to get into some best practices that I learned through building a data set for my fellowship and from the industry, and how you build these small data sets. And the first one that I'm going to give you is that you should start with the questions that you have. There's really a tendency when you're getting into starting to do data analysis and visualization is finding a data set and trying to make something from it. But that doesn't mean that it's something that you care about or that answers the questions that are critical to your audience or your communities. So before you start collecting data, think about what the questions you have and whether there are actually gaps in the data. So using your example, if the question is how many abandoned or vacant buildings there are in a particular community and there's not official data, then maybe the only way you can answer that is to build your own data set, and that's a great thing to do. And maybe another question you have is, where are they disproportionately located, or you want to show that because that's your intuition. So your data collection better capture the address and the coordinates instead of just counting them. I want to just really, really drive this home that we are all working in situations, particularly in journalism, where we have a scarcity of resources. This is not about making new work or starting a new practice. It's about thinking of the practice of reporting in a different way. So this daily story about violence is answering questions like who, what, when, where, how, but it also has data points like the number of suspects who are involved, the location of this incident, the gender of the victim, that a firearm was used in it. And this could be captured as data. And in fact, the reporter who's writing the story is doing that particularly on weekends where there's a lot of violence. He is tracking the number of people who are shot and the number of people killed. And this starts on this pad and ends up in a computer database. But one thing that he does, which I think is really successful, is that he's tweeting out his pen and paper database as he's reporting this. And sharing data early on in the collection is really, really important. I think this report by the Washington Post that many of you have seen is a really good example of that. Again, this person is tracking donations to, or I think recipients of funds from Trump's foundation, and as he was reporting it, was sharing his findings. So before the story was even published, showing the way that his database, which is a notebook, is being updated. That's important not only to your audiences, but also internally. If you ask friends or coworkers in your newsroom or your organization to help you collect this data, or like I suggested earlier, members of the audience, you are going to find out much more quickly if there's things that you are missing, if there's assumptions that you're making, if there's ways that you're categorizing the rows of data in your spreadsheet or your database that are not correct or are missing things. The faster you share that and share in that process, the more quickly you're going to get that feedback and be able to update your data collection process. Still, even as you're sharing this and maybe sharing in the workload of building these databases, it is really important for there to be an owner of the database who's holding on to it as closely as this cat is holding on to it.
I was wondering where the hook was going to come. Hold the pizza in your mouth.
And this is so you can set sort of those initial standards. How are we going to format dates? How are we going to, what categories are we going to use? Are we finding that there's a lot of data entry errors that we need to talk about? Are we seeing something show up in people's notes that we want to try to track in a more structured way? Or are there things that we're tracking that maybe we actually don't care about? And an example of that is in my project in the last few months of building a database of public meetings held by Appalachian members of Congress. I found that many representatives would have events that they would call town halls, but they would be at a very specific location to a very specific audience, like seniors at a particular nursing home, and not open to the public. So I made the decision that I would not track those. And in your data collection, you're going to be making similar things. It's important for the owner of the pizza or the data to make that call and document it so everybody working on the project is not wasting their time tracking things that you don't care about. So we saw examples of people building data sets using the most basic of technologies, pen and paper, and that's where you should start. But there are ways that technology can augment the process. One is obviously automation. So instead, particularly if you have digital information, there are lots of machine learning tools and natural language processing tools that might allow you to suck in some of the information automatically. But what I've found with building data sets, one of the most effective ways that you can build in technology is to automate the workflow, or to facilitate the workflow and take out some of the stress or confusion of people who are helping to build the data set. And an example of that is this news application that I built to make my data set of those meetings. It used an API from Google to get the contact information of congressional representatives in this region and provided a script so that when I was calling the representatives, didn't have to think very hard about what I was going to ask them and gave me a place to enter it that would go straight into my database. The most crucial feature of that is when I finished it, it would just bring up another representative right away. So it let me sort of build the initial data by interviewing people as quickly as possible. If you are using some kind of technology to collect your data initially, particularly if it is using a Google form or some kind of custom web application, always include a notes field. There are going to be things that you didn't think about tracking that you realize in the process that you want to track, and you may not have time to add a field either in your spreadsheet or in your database. So having just a big open space where you or the people you're collaborating with can track that is really, really crucial. One thing that was helpful to me was using a very simple markup language called ArchEML to structure the stuff in that notes field when I realized I cared about it. So this is an example of, I realized I needed to keep track of the source, the URL source of some of my information. It's not in its own field in the form, but the way I formatted it allowed me to write a program to suck that out. You need each row, each record, each thing in your data set to stand out. And that means having its own identifier, even if it's just a number. You may be compelled to just use the row of the spreadsheet to do that. That doesn't scale well because it could break if you reorder the rows or if you're selecting a subset of the information and sharing it with people. So adding your own identifier is really crucial. If this is something you're interested in doing, I can show you a cool Google Sheets plugin that generates a globally unique identifier. On the topic of identifiers, as you're collecting your data, you want to think about ways that your data set can link with other data sets. And if there are identifiers for those things, include them early on. And that will let you have insight. For instance, in my project, I included what was called an Open Civic Data Identifier for the congressional district, which allowed me to bring in the voting records of members of Congress, as well as that contact information that you saw earlier. A few more tips as you're building your data set is to keep the raw data. You don't know, you might not care about it now, but it might be really, really valuable in the future. A really good example of that is at the Tribune. There was an editor who was keeping every single press release that the police department was sending out when they were unresponsive to a Freedom of Information Act request about police-involved shootings. Reporters were able to use those press releases as one input to build their own database. And finally, this is building your own data set is an iterative process. At every step of the way, you and your collaborators should be asking yourselves, are there things that we care about that we aren't capturing right now? Are there things that are messy? Generating quick aggregate statistics like the average and the mean of the things, or the average, the mean, the highest and lowest of whatever it is that you're recording, and sharing those with people. And even asking yourself, do I still care about it? Is the amount of time that I'm putting into collecting this data worth the value of the story that I'm trying to tell? And maybe deciding if there's a reasonable point to just stop doing it. So those are some examples and best practices in building very small data sets. I would love to open it up to all of you if you have examples of data that you're collecting that is small in size and how it's helped you tell stories.
Yeah, is this happening anywhere around the state, Dan? Can you get to Will? And the great news about what Geoff was just talking about is that if you're like me and you're like, oh, that was like way over my head because it seems complicated, there are people here to help. You know, so journalists are like often sociologists or like people person, and they're not always programmers. So find the people that can help you. And the good news about this session is that they're here in this state and their arms are wide open. So don't go wanting for expertise.
And I'll add that the first step is often not very complicated. It's sort of paying attention and recording something, even if it's as simple as this. And then you can take this information you're collecting and leverage your networks like they have all been talking about to find ways to deal with that data or to tell the story visually in the way that you're interested in doing it.
Will.
So you asked for examples, and the example that I was thinking about raises a question that I had a follow-up that I wanted to ask you about. So the example is a group of people, citizens, an association that is going out and documenting dilapidated homes and buildings in a part of Charleston. They've done this on their own initiative with support from actually a group at WVU. And I was thinking about your comment about sort of connection between the media and community groups. And when the media designs its own systems for collecting data, it knows how to filter what's important for the purposes of the media. But when community groups or individuals or activists or whatever are gathering information, it's generally for a different specific purpose than the media would do it. So are you aware of best practices where either at the community group's initiation or the media's initiation, there's been what I'll say advanced or at least concurrent conversations, so the process of gathering information and data sets is done in a way that makes it as user-friendly for the media, as low cost to turn that into actual columns? Because I think that has to be a conversation. And so are there best practices for either the community group or the media opening that up? And I'll give an example of that. Because of my background, I understand the value of speaking on background or off the record or whatever, and can open up those kinds of conversations for causes that I care about. But I don't think that's commonly understood. So any thoughts from any of the panelists or, frankly, any of the media in the room?
Well,
yeah.
Put everything in an Excel docs. Please, God.
yeah.
Google spreadsheets.
Google spreadsheets, please. We've got this awesome organization. It's called the Department of Environmental Protection. And they, for years, have been collecting data. Like, for years, they've been collecting data. And they write it down with pencils on paper. And then they file it where it is absolutely useless. So I discovered this thing called Comet Docs. Have you heard of this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I call them research projects now, on landfills in West Virginia. And there's so much data that the DEP has. And so I got all of it. And it's all scanned PDFs. And Comet Docs is a program that will take forms and try to its best ability to translate that into data you've got to pay for it. It's like $10 a month, something like that. But it did allow me to access the information with some grueling work. It did allow me to sort of access some of that. And so that was a way that I was able to do that. But otherwise, any community citizen action, anything, just encourage them to make data usable for journalists.
And we've also at the Gazette Mail, and Ken Ward, our investigative reporter, and others have been making some of their data available on Google Documents. And I did want to make a point. You all, not to brag on the Gazette Mail, but you all have heard of that we won a Pulitzer. Well, that Pulitzer was based upon data collection. I mean, we'd been reporting for years and years about the amount of opioids pouring into the state and what the effect it was having on people. Well, it was only until Eric Eyre documented specifically the numbers, the millions of pills that were coming to specific pharmacies in places like Kermit, which had a population of 400 and had like 400 million pills or something coming in, that blew the doors off of that story. I did want to apologize for coming in late. I'd forgotten that the state flower of West Virginia, the orange construction cone, was in bloom on Interstate 79.
Awesome. Thank you. Doug from the Charleston Gazette Mail, and that was Glynis Board from West Virginia Public Broadcasting and the Ohio Valley Resource. Geoff, did you want to follow up on any of that stuff?
I wanted to go back to the original question, and I think your advice of asking people to put it in spreadsheets is a great example. I would say that news organizations publishing some of their source data is really useful to the problem you're speaking to, because it gives you examples that you can quickly say, well, this is how we share our data that is in a format that we were able to report from. Make your data look like this. And I'm happy to share some more specific, very accessible how-to guides of how to structure a spreadsheet that makes analysis as easy as possible. I would say my biggest suggestion is to go to organizations and push them for data early on. I think that a lot of organizations that work with the media are really quick to give you a soundbite or a few minutes with a representative, and much cagier about sharing your data. And the more you push them for it and work with them on it early on in the story, the more likely it is that you're going to get in a format that you can work with by the time you want to publish.
So the you in what you're saying is to the media, to reach out early in a process with a community group to establish.
Right, and I think that's true too as a advocacy organization. If you have data, making a pitch for database stories, in addition to just anecdotal ones, to media organizations. I think there is a really awesome community organization in Chicago called Lucy Parsons Labs that has been doing a lot of largely volunteer-based Freedom of Information Act requests, and then giving that data and documents to freelance reporters to cover some underreported stories about civil asset forfeiture by the police department in the city.
Awesome. So in the interest of moving along, thanks, Geoff. And thank you, WVU, for bringing people like Geoff to the state. It's invaluable when you get knowledge and expertise like this here to share it with people. It's really helpful. So in the interest of moving along, sometimes I think data collection, we think of it as being, contrary to what Geoff was saying, there's a tech element that sometimes is overwhelming for people, but what it's about is audience engagement, right? Like asking your readers, tell us, give us some information about what's happening with you. And so I was really interested in something that the Gazette Mail did recently that sort of was an example of a very simple element of audience engagement that anyone can do who can type. Maria, would you tell us a little bit about what this is and what the impetus for this effort was?
Sure. So a group of us from O&A in Charleston and several of them members of the feature staff at the Gazette Mail attended an audience engagement seminar here at the Media Innovation Center in April. And it's sort of stuff that we've all heard. If you're a journalist, you've heard about, talking to your audience and finding out what they want ahead of time. But this was a little bit more savvy and advanced from that, and it gave us some good ideas. We came away thinking, if you look at the old school model of journalism, which is we all sit around in a newsroom and think about what our audiences might want to hear and might be thinking and might be wondering about, and then we rewrite a story, and then there's comments online that say, well, no, that's really not what I was wondering about. So audience engagement really means starting at the very beginning, asking your audience to submit their questions and their ideas. And so we did that. We actually, pitched a story in the Gazette Mail, a feature section, and said, what do you want to know? Write your questions into us. Give us some ideas. Send us your contact information. And one of the very first things we got I thought was really interesting. A lady said that she was in Montgomery, West Virginia, and she wanted to know what happens to birds who nest on top of cell phone towers. in the state of West Virginia. I don't know. I have no idea. But so I called her up and I said, where did this question come from? And she said, well, she's in Montgomery, West Virginia, and every morning she gets breakfast and coffee and donuts at the Dunkin' Donuts or Dairy Queen or something there, and she can see a cell phone tower, and she can see at the top of the cell phone tower there's this giant, huge nest, and she can see the parent birds bringing in food for their little babies, and she can hear the babies, talking and chirping and stuff, and she's concerned because she heard that last year, whatever was there last year, somebody told her that they were bald eagles maybe, and they got killed, and she's really panicked about this particular nest and wants to know what's happening. So she told me where they were located, and with that information, we were able to, if you see it there, it's very near the Canal River, which we now have learned osprey look for river sources because that's where their food is, and they build, if you have a cell phone tower near a river, then you're very likely to have an osprey nest at the top of it. But we from that information, we were able to locate the owner of the cell phone tower and called them up. And as it turns out, they have 204 cell phone towers in the state of West Virginia. 5 of them have osprey nests on top of them. And this particular photo that we have, if you want to show the photo of the osprey on top of their cell phone tower, the guy said, no, they were not bald eagles the year before. They were osprey the year before. They were not killed because, as it turns out, there's not just a state law, but also a federal law that protects these guys. And if you cover natural resources and environmental issues, you probably know this. I didn't, and so I don't, and so I didn't know that. But they are actually under federal protection. And so we sent, we thought that was a wonderful photo. That took about 6 hours of standing out at the top of the cell phone, or near the cell phone tower, waiting for this bird to come back. But we were excited to find out that there's all this information about cell phone towers. And we had folks who wrote in and said that they had seen cell phone towers with nests, and they had wondered what happened. And also we learned that for this particular cell phone tower, AT&T has submitted a request to do an update to its service. And that update request has been denied until nesting season is over because the guys who own the cell phone tower legally can't, and I think for the safety of their workers, won't go to the top of the cell phone tower because this bird would probably not take it very well. So we thought that was a really interesting project, and that's just a small example of audience engagement. We have a question, somebody else sent in a question about the number of panhandlers in Charleston, and hasn't it tripled or quadrupled? I don't know, but we're looking into that. And so these are examples of some things that we're trying with audience engagement. And I think, we've asked, you guys have, I guess, some whiteboards up in the area. So I would assume that all of you have questions about your communities that you would like to find out. Some of you are journalists, but some of you are not, and you might be interested in having some astute reporters at our news organization or perhaps other news organizations who would like to look into these questions. So there's some notepads up at one of the screens up near the entrance. And to Maria's point, Doug.
I would just say that you can be sure that the idea of let's do a story about ospreys nesting on cell towers would not have come up in the newsroom meetings that morning. And it was fascinating to touch this topic and have it reverberate out into federal laws involving nesting birds. And it's just, we would never have gone there.
And so congratulations to the Gazette-Mail on finding a very simple solution to what's a really effective strategy for newspapers and journalists. I'm sure there are lots of other examples around there of whether you're freelance or you work in a newsroom of doing this sort of audience engagement. This is an audience engagement strategy. Right? It's like, let's get a bunch of community people in a room. A happy hour is an audience engagement strategy. A fun run sponsored by the newspaper is an audience engagement strategy. So sometimes they are place-based as well. So that's kind of one end of the scale. Dave, do you guys are you ready to do this? So the excellent and savvy folks from Public Broadcasting and WVU, Dave and Tyler, actually just going to show you a little bit about a slightly more tech-involved audience engagement platform that they are playing with at the moment. It's coming up, guys. And if you want to, if you want to throw ideas around with these guys or with the O&A, that's the point of it. Please don't let this opportunity slip through your hands to meet with some people who can show you some fascinating things.
one works, I think. All right. Yeah, so my name is Dave Mistich. I'm the managing editor of 100 Days in Appalachia, which is a collaborative project between West Virginia University's Reed College of Media and West Virginia Public Broadcasting and the Daily Yonder. And one of the things that we've been thinking of a lot is ways. Is that good? All right, yeah. So one of the things we've been thinking a lot of is ways to engage the audience online. And so we dug around. We actually came across a platform called Ask, which is it's an open source platform from the Coral Project, which is also another sort of collaborative tech entity out there. And one of the things we wanted to know is, after 100 days, we wanted to get a feeling for what Appalachia, so-called Trump country, thought of Trump. So what we did is we wound up putting together a forum, and I'll have Tyler bring that up first. And we just very simply, very generically asked people to provide their name, their email, where they were in Appalachia, and their thoughts on the administration thus far. And of course, then we also asked them whether or not we could publish their responses, because we thought that was kind of a decent thing to do, for people. The whole idea behind this was a couple different reasons. One being that we could get material that engages our audience, that we could show people that people are interested in engaging in this conversation, and that we could publish that, which I just did a few minutes ago, and Tyler can show you the way that looks right here. And so you'll see each little block here is another response, and it's got the person's name and where they're located. We got a wide range of stuff. Some people, of course, very much in support of Donald Trump at this point. Other people, extremely critical. So you'll see a wide range of different thoughts and feelings and reasons behind those feelings on this altogether. That was one reason why we wanted to do it. The other reason is that we felt it was a really good opportunity to cultivate sources into the future. And with having their name and contact information, we can go back and talk to them whenever we do have stories that come down the line. So one, just having the opportunity to engage the audience, and two, having an opportunity to cultivate sources into the future. And I'm going to hand the microphone to Tyler, who's going to explain how this all sort of put together, because he spent a day or two trying to make this work. So here you go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler, and I'm the web developer. Is it working? You have to speak right into it like that. So my role in this is a web development part of 100 Days. Anything that they want installed, anything we're thinking about doing, stuff like this. My background is not a whole lot in installing Linux and putting on containers in Amazon and doing all this stuff. But when you get on the Ask Coral Project website, they kind of break this down for you step by step, line for line. So even someone who's not really into coding or knows a whole lot about different flavors of Linux or whatever it might be, you can easily install all of this on your site. And when I first looked at this, I was like, this kind of looks like a fancy Google Docs. Like, what's so special about a form that just kind of submits to us? What's so special about that? We don't have comments enabled on the website, but this is a way that kind of allowed us to see what people were talking about, right? And the back end of this system, we're able to see all of these comments, and we can easily embed all of that directly to our website. We don't have to copy and paste. You're not doing all of that in Google Docs. So, and it's a free thing to use, right? It's open source. You can do whatever you want with it. So we've not really played around with much of the look and style of it quite yet, but there's a lot of things that you could do with stuff like this. So, any questions on? Sure. Yeah, so everything comes to this back end. We're able to see comments. Can we publish it? Everything that you saw. And we can put this into a gallery, and we can choose kind of what we want to publish from the submissions. And so everything is kind of laid out nicely. There's not a whole lot of copying or pasting or anything. And then we take a simple little code and drop it into the CMS with WordPress. And it's already built in. You just drop it in, and everything that you picked in here will show up in WordPress. So,
and I think what we're going to do is, if not later today, then after we all walk out of here, like tomorrow, let's follow up with the News Story crowd and do an audience engagement session, right? So let's not waste the fact that we have like 300 and something people registered for this thing, all of which presumably are passionate, engaged West Virginians who are interested in what's happening in the state and the region. So we're going to use you. Right? We want to mine your brains and mine your thoughts and mine your hearts. And this is a really great way to do it without having to physically call you all. This is kind of like the raves and rants section in the Gazette Mail. Right. It's like if that was actually a really helpful story lead generator, right? So, that's kind of what we're trying to do here. So we're going to move on to the next session. If you have any questions for any of the incredibly savvy and generous and kind-spirited and helpful journalists that you just heard grab them. Like, they're all great people and they're incredibly talented. Grab them, talk to them, go to the ONA meetings. You now no longer have an excuse that the tech is too confusing. So with that, let's move it on in a minute. 5 minutes, and we'll keep going. Thanks, guys. So at 11 o'clock, there's actually 2 sessions. There's one in here for anyone who wants to know how to use Facebook Live in newsrooms. So if you're a journalist or an editor or a citizen journalist or whatever, and you're interested in learning how to use Facebook Live, that is in here with a lovely lady called Gina. In here is a bunch of dudes that I love from Huntington going to be talking about how to start a festival in your own community. So this is for these are for the people who like to party, and these are for the people who want to work in newsrooms. So not to pigeonhole.